At my sister's 30th birthday dinner, she physically blocked the bread basket and sneered, "Do not fill your plate. You did not pay for this." My mother sipped her vintage wine and smiled. "Real family comes first, Kendra. Connor is footing the bill tonight, so show some respect to the man of the hour." I simply nodded, wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, put on my coat, and walked out without raising my voice. Moments later, from the back of my chauffeured car, I watched the restaurant manager deliver the massive bill to them. He explained that the woman in the red dress had canceled the reservation deposit and asked him to hand the check directly to them. I watched their faces drain of color when the credit card declined. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from a toxic table to build your own peace. The chandeliers at Les Bilboquets cast a warm golden glow over our private dining room, but the atmosphere at the table was anything but inviting. Securing this particular room at one of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurants usually required a 6-month waitlist and a miracle. I had bypassed all of that, using my firm's corporate concierge, quietly putting my own black card on file to cover the $2,000 minimum spend deposit. I did it because it was my sister Jada's 30th birthday, and despite everything, I wanted her to have a beautiful evening. I am 35 years old, and I run a highly successful discreet crisis management and public relations firm right here in the city. My job is to protect high net worth individuals, politicians, and corporate executives from their own worst mistakes. It is a high-pressure, high-reward career that I built from the ground up through sheer willpower and endless sleepless nights. To my family, however, my multi-million-dollar empire is just a cute little freelance hustle. My parents, Desmond and Brenda, have always been obsessed with Atlanta high society. They value legacy appearances and the kind of generational wealth that comes with a recognizable last name and a membership to the right country club. Because I chose to forge my own path, refusing to marry into their preferred social circles or follow their rigid blueprint for success, they treated my career like a temporary phase I would eventually grow out of. Jada, on the other hand, was the golden child. She had played the game perfectly. She married Connor, a white real estate developer who talked a big game about his massive commercial projects and his family's trust fund. In my parents' eyes, Connor was the ultimate prize, the man who was going to elevate our family legacy to new heights. That night, Connor was holding court at the head of the table, acting like he owned the entire restaurant. He wore a custom-tailored suit and a smug expression that never seemed to leave his face. From the moment we sat down, he was aggressive and loud, snapping his fingers to get the waiter's attention and complaining about the temperature of the water. He aggressively ordered the most expensive items on the menu, without even glancing at the prices. "We are sparing no expense for my queen tonight," he announced to the room, waving his hand dismissively at the sommelier. "Bring us 3 bottles of the vintage champagne, the imported Wagyu steaks for everyone, and do not hold back on the truffles." I sat quietly near the end of the table, sipping my sparkling water and observing the dynamic. As a crisis manager, I read people for a living. I read their body language, their micro-expressions, the things they try to hide behind loud voices and flashy displays of wealth. Connor was trying too hard. The way he swirled his wine, the way he boasted about a supposedly closed multi-million-dollar property deal without offering any concrete details, the way he subtly belittled the service staff. It all screamed of a man overcompensating for something. But I kept my mouth shut. I had learned long ago that pointing out the flaws in my parents' perfect picture only made me the villain. I was there to celebrate my sister, eat my dinner, and go back to the peace of my own life. My father, Desmond, leaned forward, hanging on to every word Connor said. "It is just brilliant, Connor," my father beamed. "The way you navigate the commercial real estate market is truly inspiring. Jada is so blessed to have a man who knows how to build real wealth." Jada preened next to him, adjusting the diamond tennis bracelet Connor had supposedly gifted her that morning. She looked across the table at me, her eyes lingering on my simple but elegant red dress. It was a custom designer piece worth more than her entire outfit, but because it did not have a flashy logo plastered across the chest, she assumed it was off the rack. When are you going to settle down and find someone who can take care of you? Kendra. Jada asked, her tone dripping with fake concern. You cannot keep doing this freelance computer stuff forever. You need a real plan. I offered a polite, measured smile. My firm is doing exceptionally well, Jada, but thank you for the concern. Connor chuckled, leaning back in his chair and draping his arm over Jada's shoulders. Let the girl dream, babe. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues. We cannot all be building empires. Some people are just meant to be the hired help. My mother, Brenda, laughed softly at that, bringing her wineglass to her lips. Now, Connor, be nice. Kendra works very hard at her little projects. We are just hoping she eventually finds a nice man to provide her with some stability. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, a heavy, suffocating sensation that I only ever experienced when I was in the same room as my family. I spent my days advising billionaires and sitting in boardrooms with powerful executives who respected my intellect and feared my capabilities. Yet here at this table, I was reduced to a pathetic, unmarried freelancer who needed charity. I took a slow, deep breath, reminding myself that their perception of me did not define my reality. The atmosphere in this private dining room grew increasingly tense as the evening dragged on. The waiter returned carrying massive silver trays loaded with the extravagant food Connor had ordered. The smell of roasted truffles and perfectly seared Wagyu beef filled the air. They placed the plates down with practiced elegance. I had ordered a simple sea bass, deliberately keeping my own costs down out of habit, even though I knew the $2,000 deposit I had already paid would cover a significant portion of the table's total. As everyone began cutting into their steaks and praising Connor for his incredible generosity, the waiter set down a basket of warm artisan bread in the center of the table. I had been sitting in traffic for an hour before arriving and was genuinely hungry. I reached across the white tablecloth to take a piece of the bread. Before my fingers could even brush the crust, Jada's hand shot out. She physically blocked the bread basket, sliding it closer to her own plate. I looked up confused, meeting my sister's eyes. She was glaring at me, her face twisted into a sneer of pure disdain. "Do not fill your plate," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, mocking whisper that cut clearly through the jazz music playing in the background. "You did not pay for this." The table went completely silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. I sat frozen, my hand still hovering in the empty space above the table. I looked at my sister, trying to process the sheer petty cruelty of her words. Over a piece of bread. I looked to my father, expecting him to reprimand her for such terrible manners in a public place. Desmond just looked away, suddenly very interested in cutting his steak. I turned my gaze to my mother. Surely Brenda, who cared so deeply about etiquette and high society manners, would not let this stand. Instead, Brenda calmly set down her vintage champagne. She smoothed the napkin on her lap, adjusted her pearls, and looked me dead in the eye. "Real family comes first." Kendra, my mother, said, her voice perfectly steady and devoid of any warmth. "Connor is footing the bill tonight, so show some respect to the man of the hour. You should be grateful we even invited you to sit at this table." Time seemed to slow down. I looked at the four faces around the table. My sister smug and victorious. My brother-in-law grinning with arrogant amusement. My father cowardly and complicit. My mother cold and unyielding. For 35 years I had tried to earn my place at their table. I had tried to prove my worth, hoping that one day they would look at me with the same pride and adoration they showered upon Jada. I had swallowed their passive-aggressive comments, endured their financial lectures, and allowed them to treat my massive success like an embarrassing secret. But in that exact moment, staring at the breadbasket, I was forbidden to touch something fundamental broke inside me. It was not a violent break. It was not an explosion of anger or a dramatic outburst of tears. It was a quiet, profound realization. They were never going to respect me. They were never going to love me the way I needed to be loved, and I was completely, utterly exhausted from trying to convince them of my value. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not defend my career or remind them of the deposit I had paid. I simply lowered my hand and picked up my linen napkin. I calmly dabbed the corners of my mouth, folded the napkin perfectly into a square, and placed it next to my untouched plate of sea bass. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The movement was so smooth and deliberate that it caught them off guard. "What are you doing?" Jada asked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. I reached for my red designer trench coat draped over the back of my chair and slipped my arms into the sleeves. I tied the belt around my waist and picked up my clutch. "You are absolutely right, Jada," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any emotion. "I did not pay for this, and I certainly do not want to intrude on real family time." "Kendra, sit down and stop making a scene," Desmond hissed, glancing nervously at the closed door of our private room. "I am not making a scene, Dad. I am leaving." I looked at Connor, who was now frowning, the smugness finally slipping from his face. "Enjoy the Wagyu, Connor. Make sure you tip the waitstaff well. They have worked very hard tonight." Without waiting for a response, I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. I did not slam it behind me. I closed it with a soft, definitive click, shutting them inside their bubble of delusion and arrogance. I walked down the softly lit hallway of the restaurant, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. My heart was beating steadily. My mind was completely clear. The crisis manager in me had taken over, and my first order of business was to neutralize the immediate threat. I walked straight past the crowded main dining room and approached the maitre d's podium at the front of the restaurant. The manager, a distinguished older man who knew my corporate account well, smiled warmly when he saw me. "Miss Kendra," he greeted me. "Is everything to your liking in the private room?" "Everything was lovely," I replied smoothly. "However, there has been a change of plans regarding the billing for tonight's event. I need you to pull up my corporate file immediately." He typed my name into his terminal. "Yes, I have your black card on file with the $2,000 authorization for the deposit." "Excellent," I said. "I am revoking that authorization right now. I need you to cancel the deposit and remove my card from the final bill." The manager looked surprised, but maintained his professional composure. "Of course, Miss Kendra. The authorization is canceled. How would you like us to handle the final check?" I glanced back toward the hallway leading to the private rooms. "The gentleman at the head of the table, Connor, has generously offered to cover the entire evening. Please ensure that every single item, including the private room fee, the vintage champagne, and the truffles, is placed on his tab. The current total should be around $4,800. Please hand the UN comped bill directly to him." "Understood," the manager said, tapping the final instructions into his system. I thanked him, pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant, and stepped out into the cool Atlanta night air. The valet immediately signaled for my driver. Within moments, my black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. I climbed into the spacious back seat, the tinted windows offering me a perfect unseen vantage point of the restaurant's brilliantly lit interior. I told my driver to wait just a moment. I leaned back against the plush leather seats and watched through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Le Bilboquet. I could see directly into the main thoroughfare of the restaurant, waiting for the inevitable outcome. About 5 minutes later, the manager approached the private dining room. I watched the scene unfold like a silent movie. The manager entered the room holding the black leather checkbook. I could see him speaking politely, explaining the situation. He handed the booklet directly to Connor. Connor laughed, a big performative gesture, likely making a joke about how he was happy to treat his family. He confidently pulled a heavy platinum card from his wallet and dropped it onto the tray. The manager took the card and stepped away to process the payment. The family went back to their laughing and eating, completely oblivious. 2 minutes later, the manager returned. His posture was rigid, his expression apologetic but firm. He leaned down and whispered something into Connor's ear. He handed the platinum card back, shaking his head. Even from the street, I could see the exact moment Connor's entire world shifted. His chest puffed out in indignation. He dug into his wallet and pulled out a second card, slapping it onto the table. The manager took it and left again. Less than a minute later, he was back. He shook his head once more. The second card had declined. The smugness completely vanished from Connor's face, replaced by sheer, naked panic. He started frantically tapping on his phone, trying to pull up banking apps. Jada leaned over, her smile completely dropping as she realized what was happening. I watched my mother put a hand to her chest, looking around nervously to see if any of the other high society patrons had noticed the commotion. Desmond's face drained of all color. He looked like he was about to have a heart attack. They were trapped. A bill for nearly $5,000 sitting on the table, and the man of the hour did not have a single working credit card to his name. They were experiencing the exact humiliation they had tried to inflict upon me, broadcast to the very people they were so desperate to impress. I did not feel a rush of petty joy. I did not feel the need to gloat. I just felt a profound, chilling sense of validation. The curtain had been pulled back, and the illusion was cracking. I tapped the glass partition separating me from my driver. "You can take me home now, Marcus," I said softly. I leaned back, closing my eyes as the SUV merged smoothly into the Atlanta traffic, leaving the toxic table and the illusion of their perfect family far behind me in the rearview mirror. The leather seat of my SUV felt like a sanctuary. I watched the city lights of Buckhead blur past the tinted windows, letting the deep, quiet hum of the engine wash over me. The silence inside the car was absolute and pristine. Then my phone vibrated in my clutch. It vibrated just once at first, then again, and then it erupted into a relentless, synchronized symphony of buzzing that demanded my attention. I did not rush to pull it out. I let it buzz. I took a slow breath, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and finally unlocked the screen. 54 notifications had piled up in the span of 3 minutes. The barrage of hostility was exactly what I had anticipated, yet the sheer audacity of the messages still managed to impress me. My mother had sent a wall of text that read like a masterclass in manipulation and gaslighting. She did not ask why I left. She did not apologize for her behavior. Instead, she went on the offensive. She accused me of meticulously planning the entire evening just to humiliate them in front of Atlanta high society. In her twisted narrative, I had orchestrated the reservation and the deposit solely to pull the rug out from under Connor at the last second. She claimed I was punishing Jada for having the perfect marriage and the social standing that I supposedly coveted. "You ruined your sister's milestone," the final text read. "You could not stand to see her happy and celebrated. You are cold and vindictive, Kendra. You embarrassed this family in front of people who matter." A notification popped up for a voicemail from my father. I tapped play, holding the phone to my ear, while watching the streetlights reflect off the dark glass. Desmond did not yell. He used his executive voice, the heavy, commanding tone he reserved for firing underperforming warehouse managers at his logistics company. "Kendra, this stunt you just pulled is unforgivable. We are sitting here dealing with restaurant management while you throw a childish tantrum over a piece of bread. You have always been a spiteful disappointment, but tonight you crossed a line that you cannot uncross. Do not bother coming to Sunday dinner. Do not bother calling your mother." I deleted the voicemail before the automated system could even prompt me. A spiteful disappointment. The words bounced around my mind, but they failed to draw blood. They were just words from a cowardly man who had sat silently while his own daughter was treated like a stray dog, begging for scraps at a table she had secured. He was not angry that I was disrespected. He was angry that he had been made to look foolish in a room full of wealthy strangers. Then came Jada's messages. They were a frantic, chaotic mix of blind rage and desperate entitlement. She did not start by asking for help or trying to smooth things over. She started with a direct order: "Wire me $5,000 right now." The text came back to back, typed so fast I could practically see her manicured thumbs hammering the screen in a panic. "Connor is on the phone with his bank," she wrote. "His accounts were temporarily frozen due to a banking fraud alert. Because we are out celebrating and the charges were unusually high, it triggered a security hold. They cannot unlock his platinum card until tomorrow morning when the fraud department opens. The restaurant manager is threatening to call the police. Kendra, wire the money to my account immediately. You owe us this for walking out and throwing a jealous tantrum like a teenager. Send the money now." I stared at the bright screen of my phone, reading Jada's words over and over. A jealous tantrum, a temporary banking fraud alert, a sudden simultaneous security hold on multiple top-tier credit cards belonging to a supposedly high-net-worth real estate developer. I set my phone down on the leather seat beside me and let out a soft, humorless laugh. I deal with billionaires, state politicians, and Fortune 500 executives daily. My entire career is built on understanding the mechanics of wealth crisis and public relations. I know exactly how elite banking operates. When a high-net-worth individual drops $5,000 on a celebratory dinner, the bank does not freeze all their accounts and leave them stranded to face police intervention over an unpaid bill. If a legitimate fraud alert is triggered on a premium account, a concierge banker calls the client directly, verifies their identity, and clears the charge in exactly 60 seconds. You do not get left washing dishes in the back of a luxury restaurant until the fraud department opens on Monday morning. The pieces of the puzzle started rapidly snapping together in my mind. Connor was aggressive with the waitstaff. Connor boasted loudly about deals without giving specifics. Connor ordered the most expensive items on the menu with reckless abandon, fully assuming my corporate card was catching the safety net. And now Connor's cards were declining across the board. My crisis manager instincts flared to life. This was not a banking error. This was insolvency. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person I trusted implicitly. Malik answered on the second ring. Malik was my chief operating officer, my chosen brother, and a former forensic auditor who could track a missing dollar through a dozen shell companies blindfolded. "Are you at the office?" I asked, my voice completely stripped of any lingering familial emotion. "Always," Malik replied, the sound of keyboard clacking echoing in the background. "How was the birthday dinner? Did they choke on the wagyu?" "They choked on the bill," I said. I pulled my card and walked out. "But something is wrong, Malik. Jada just texted me, demanding $5,000. She claims Connor's platinum cards were declined because of a sudden fraud alert." The clacking on Malik's end stopped immediately. A fraud alert on a developer's platinum card for a $5,000 dinner charge. He asked, his tone laced with heavy skepticism. "That is pocket change for the kind of portfolio he claims to manage. Banks do not lock you out for pocket change." "Exactly," I said. "I need you to run a quiet deep dive background check on Connor. Bypass the polished public relations front. Dig into the public records, the court filings, the tax liens. Look into his real estate development firm. I want to know exactly how much cash he actually has, and more importantly, I want to know exactly what he owes." "Give me 20 minutes, Malik said. "I will have a full dossier waiting on your desk by the time you get here." I ended the call and instructed my driver to change course. We were not going to my penthouse. We were going straight to my downtown office. The hurt and betrayal from the dinner had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. My parents had chosen Connor as their golden ticket, prioritizing his illusion of wealth over my actual success. They had insulted me, gaslighted me, and demanded I finance their arrogant display. Now, I was going to find out exactly what kind of man they had sold their souls to protect. The tires of my SUV glided to a smooth stop inside the private underground parking garage of my office building. I bypassed the main lobby elevators, swiping my keycard to access the secure private lift that opened directly into my firm's penthouse suite. Even at this hour, the office hummed with quiet, focused energy. My team handled crises that broke at midnight in Tokyo or dawned in London. Sleep was a luxury in my line of work. Malik was already waiting in the primary conference room when I walked in. The massive glass table was illuminated by the harsh glow of 3 separate monitors. Malik is a tall, impeccably dressed man who left a lucrative career at a top accounting firm because he preferred tearing down corrupt institutions over protecting them. He handed me a cup of black coffee without a word. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. I took a sip of the scalding coffee and set it down. "Tell me he is broke," I said, pulling out a leather chair. "Broke is an understatement," Malik replied, his fingers flying across his glowing keyboard. "Broke implies he just lacks liquid assets. Connor is a walking financial crater. He is radioactive." Malik tapped a key, and a complex web of financial flowcharts appeared on the main presentation screen. I stared at the lines connecting various limited liability companies, all tracing back to Connor. I started with the obvious, Malik explained, pointing to the largest box on the screen. His real estate development firm. He has a gorgeous website, an expensive office lease in Midtown, and a roster of impressive-looking mock-ups. But when you look at the actual municipal records, the reality is completely different. He has not pulled a single commercial building permit in 3 years. There are no active construction sites. There are no payroll records for construction crews, architects, or engineers. The entire firm is a ghost ship. It is just a highly polished public relations front designed to make him look like a visionary builder. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. So where is his money coming from? How is he paying for the bespoke suits, the vintage champagne, and the luxury cars? Malik brought up a new slide. He is bleeding his creditors dry. He has defaulted on 3 separate business loans in the past 18 months. He currently owes upwards of $2 million to various private lenders. But that is not the worst part, Kendra. The banks caught on to his insolvency a year ago. They stopped extending him credit, so he had to find a new unsecured source of cash to maintain his lifestyle. Malik hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was a rare break in his usual clinical composure. I braced myself. "Show me," I commanded. He pulled up a series of bank statements and wire transfer logs. "These are the operating accounts for your father's logistics company," Malik said quietly. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted documents Malik had somehow legally acquired through his network. Desmond had built his logistics company from a single delivery truck into a regional powerhouse. It was the crown jewel of our family, the source of our initial wealth, and the foundation of the legacy my parents were so obsessed with protecting. "Look at the outgoing vendor payments starting roughly 2 years ago," Malik instructed. I traced my finger down the screen. Every month, massive payments of $20,000, sometimes $30,000 were being wired from my father's corporate operating account to a consulting firm. I checked the corporate registry data Malik had pulled. The consulting firm was registered to a post office box in Delaware. The sole managing director was Connor. "He is billing my father for management consulting fees," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He is siphoning cash directly from the family business." "Exactly," Malik confirmed. And because Connor positioned himself as the brilliant real estate developer and financial whiz of the family, Desmond clearly gave him unrestricted access to the corporate accounts to audit the books. Connor simply created a fake vendor profile and started writing checks to himself. Your father is bleeding cash, and he either does not know it or he trusts Connor so blindly that he authorized the payments under the guise of an investment strategy. My heart pounded against my ribs. My parents had treated me like a financial burden tonight, loudly declaring that Connor was the one footing the bill. In reality, Connor was paying for his extravagant dinners using the very money he had stolen from my father. They had mocked me for reaching for a piece of bread, completely unaware that their golden son-in-law had already devoured their entire livelihood. "It gets worse," Malik said gently. "I ran a property title search on your parents' estate in Cascade." I froze. The Cascade estate was not just a house. It was a historic, sprawling property that Desmond and Brenda had spent a decade renovating. It was the physical manifestation of their arrival in Atlanta high society. They had always told Jada and me that the estate was completely paid off, a permanent asset that would be split equally between us as our inheritance. Malik brought up a county property deed. 6 months ago, a massive second mortgage was taken out against the Cascade estate. The loan amount was for $800,000. I stared at the signatures at the bottom of the digital document. Desmond and Brenda had signed the paperwork. They had willingly leveraged their fully owned home. Why would they do this? I asked, my mind racing. The logistics company generates enough revenue. They have no reason to leverage the house for cash. "Look at where the funds were dispersed," Malik pointed out. The bank wired the $800,000 directly to another one of Connor's shell companies. I managed to pull the email correspondence attached to the loan approval. Connor pitched it to your parents as a guaranteed high-yield investment in a commercial waterfront development project. He told them they would double their money in 12 months. they took out the mortgage and handed the entire lump sum over to him. A wave of nausea washed over me. My parents had refused to co-sign a modest business loan for my public relations firm 6 years ago. They had told me they did not mix family with business, forcing me to build my company from absolute scratch. Yet they had blindly handed over the equity of our family home to a white man they had known for less than 4 years, simply because he wore a nice suit and played the part of a wealthy developer. Their desperate need for social validation and proximity to perceived legacy wealth had blinded them completely. What did he do with the $800,000? I asked, forcing my voice to remain clinical and detached. Malik typed a few more commands. He used about $200,000 to pacify his most aggressive private lenders, keeping them from dragging him into court. He used another portion to maintain the illusion of his lifestyle here in Atlanta. The luxury cars, the designer clothes for Jada, the exorbitant dinners. And the rest I pressed. Malik brought up a lease agreement for a luxury penthouse condominium in Miami, Florida. The lease was signed by Connor, but the primary resident listed was a woman named Isabella. Alongside the lease were bank statements showing recurring monthly transfers of $12,000 to Isabella's personal accounts. He is funding a mistress, I stated flatly. A very expensive mistress, Malik corrected. He is using your parents' home equity and your father's business revenue to pay for her penthouse, her shopping habits, and his weekend getaways. The man is running a textbook Ponzi scheme on your family, Kendra, and the walls are closing in on him fast. The credit card declines tonight were just the beginning. His accounts are overdrawn. The stolen funds are gone. The private lenders are circling. It is only a matter of days before the entire facade collapses. I sat back in my leather chair, letting the magnitude of the situation settle over me. Jada had looked at me with such immense superiority tonight. She had blocked me from eating, convinced she was the queen of a wealthy empire, utterly oblivious to the fact that her husband was a bankrupt fraud, funneling her family's money to a woman in Miami. Brenda and Desmond had publicly shamed me, demanding I show respect to the man who had secretly shackled them to nearly $1 million of debt they could not afford to repay. They thought I was the failure. They thought I was the liability. What do you want to do? Malik asked, breaking the heavy silence. I have enough documentation here to take to the federal authorities. We can hand this over to the FBI for wire fraud and embezzlement by tomorrow morning. We can end him. I looked at the glowing screens tracing the lines of deception that Connor had woven through my family. Taking this straight to the authorities would certainly punish Connor. But it would also allow Brenda, Desmond, and Jada to paint themselves strictly as helpless victims. They would spin a narrative of betrayal, seeking sympathy from their high society friends. They would never take accountability for their own complicity, for their blinding arrogance, or for the way they had treated me. They needed to face the consequences of their own vanity. Do not send anything to the authorities yet. I instructed my mind, shifting into absolute crisis management mode. Print everything out. Compile the bank statements, the fake consulting invoices, the second mortgage deed, and the Miami lease agreement. Put it all into a physical binder. Malik raised an eyebrow. You want to confront them privately? No, I said, standing up from the table. A private confrontation gives them room to manipulate the narrative. My parents are masters of sweeping dirt under the rug to protect their image. If I confront them in private, they will try to handle it quietly. They will sell the logistics company, downsize their lives, and cover Connor's tracks, just to avoid the public humiliation of admitting they were conned. They will sacrifice everything they have left, just to keep their country club friends from finding out. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the dark expanse of the Atlanta skyline. My firm protected clients from scandals exactly like this, but my family was not my client. We are going to let them keep digging their grave, I said softly. We are going to lock down my own assets to ensure their financial ruin does not somehow bleed over into my company. And then we are going to wait for the perfect moment to let the entire city see exactly what kind of legacy they have built. Malik smiled a sharp, understanding expression. I will get the binders ready. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was still flooded with angry messages from Jada demanding the $5,000. I deleted the entire thread without typing a single word in response. They wanted to play games with wealth and status. I was going to show them exactly how a real empire operates. I had barely slept, but my mind was operating with terrifying clarity. By 9 the next morning, I was sitting behind my desk reviewing the hard copies Malik had printed. The heavy leather-bound binders felt like loaded weapons. My office phone buzzed. It was the front desk security. My parents were in the lobby demanding to see me without an appointment. I told security to send them up. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out my smartphone, hit the record button on my voice memo app, and placed it face down next to my keyboard. Georgia is a one-party consent state. As long as I was part of the conversation, I had every legal right to document it. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. Desmond and Brenda marched in looking like they had just stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. My mother carried her designer handbag like a shield, while my father wore his signature tailored suit. They did not look like people on the brink of federal bankruptcy. They looked indignant. They started immediately. No hello, no asking how I was. Desmond pointed a finger at me, stating that my behavior at the restaurant was an embarrassment to the family name. Brenda chimed in saying that Connor was under immense stress finalizing a multi-million-dollar merger that would secure our family legacy for generations. They demanded I call Connor and apologize. I sat perfectly still, letting the silence stretch. I asked them why Connor, a supposedly brilliant developer, would be stressed over a simple dinner bill. Brenda scoffed, calling me financially ignorant. She stated that real wealth is tied up in assets and equity, not liquid cash. Then she handed me the exact admission I needed. She proudly declared that she and my father had recently transferred emergency funds to Connor to smooth over a minor liquidity issue for his new waterfront project. They had willingly handed over the cash to protect his investments. I nodded slowly, ensuring the microphone picked up every word of their arrogant confession. I told them I understood perfectly. Believing they had put me in my place, they warned me not to show my face at family gatherings until I could show proper respect. Then they walked out, leaving me with a crystal-clear audio recording of their financial complicity. The moment the office doors clicked shut, I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. The audio file was secured and backed up to multiple encrypted cloud servers. But their visit triggered a new, more dangerous thought. If Desmond and Brenda were blindly funneling money to Connor, their inevitable financial collapse would be monumental. In the world of high finance and corporate crisis, a blast radius like that destroys anyone standing too close. I needed to ensure my own financial perimeter was completely impenetrable. I called Malik back into my office and instructed him to pull a comprehensive credit and liability report on my personal and business profiles. We needed to guarantee that my name was absolutely unattached to any of Desmond's logistics accounts or Brenda's personal lines of credit. Malik ran the checks. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the rapid clicking of his keyboard. Then he stopped. He turned the monitor toward me, his expression grave. I stared at the digital document displayed on the screen. It was a commercial line of credit agreement dated 5 years ago, issued to Jada and Connor for their initial business ventures. At the bottom of the page, listed as a secondary guarantor, was my name. Next to it was my signature. My blood ran ice cold. I had never seen this document in my life. I had never authorized anyone to use my credit history to back my sister's husband. 5 years ago, I was just getting my public relations firm off the ground. My parents had refused to co-sign a modest business loan for me, claiming they never mixed family with business. Yet here was undeniable proof that they had forged my signature to leverage my pristine credit score to secure capital for their golden child. The betrayal went far beyond emotional abuse. They had actively committed fraud, risking my livelihood, my firm, and my entire future just to hand Connor a blank check. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. Sarah was not just my best friend. She was the most ruthless financial fraud attorney in Atlanta. When she arrived at my office 20 minutes later, she took one look at the digital document and the forensic binders Malik had prepared, and her eyes hardened into polished steel. She confirmed what I already knew. The signature was a highly skilled forgery likely executed by Desmond, who had access to my old tax documents from when I first started my company. I told Sarah I wanted my name stripped from that document immediately, but I did not want Desmond or Connor alerted yet. Sarah drafted a highly confidential legal notice to the lending institution, accompanied by an affidavit from a forensic handwriting expert she kept on retainer. The notice legally severed my liability and flagged the document as fraudulent, forcing the bank to quietly freeze the line of credit for an internal audit. By the end of the day, my financial perimeter was secured. I was completely detached from the impending crater. But the strategic beauty of Sarah's maneuver was that it left Desmond and Brenda fully exposed. Without my pristine credit acting as a silent shield, the banks would soon start calling in the debts. Connor's house of cards was losing its structural integrity by the hour, and my parents had zero protection left. 2 weeks passed in total silence. I ignored every text from Jada and every passive-aggressive email from my mother. I focused entirely on my firm closing deals and managing real crises for actual billionaires. Then the mail arrived. My assistant handed me a thick, heavy envelope made of premium cardstock sealed with gold wax. I sliced it open. It was an invitation to a Black Excellence and Investment Gala to be held at the St. Regis Ballroom. The hosts listed at the top in elegant script were Desmond and Connor. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Connor was drowning in millions of dollars of debt actively under investigation by private lenders and siphoning money from his father-in-law to pay his Miami mistress. Yet he was hosting a lavish gala to celebrate generational wealth. It did not take a crisis manager to see the true motive. The gala was a hunting ground. Connor and Desmond were planning to use their polished social standing to lure new unsuspecting investors into the fold. They needed fresh capital to quietly cover the stolen funds and keep the Ponzi scheme afloat. A small, pale pink sticky note fell out of the invitation envelope. It was written in Jada's distinctive looping handwriting. "Come see what real success looks like. Try to wear something appropriate." I held the sticky note between my fingers. I looked over at the massive stack of forensic accounting binders Malik had meticulously assembled, detailing every shell company, every fake invoice, and every wire transfer to the mistress in Florida. The trap had presented itself flawlessly. They wanted me to witness their success. They wanted an audience. I picked up a heavy black fountain pen, checked the box marked yes on the response card, and handed it to my assistant to mail. I was going to give them the exact audience they deserved. Malik pulled up the property records for the Cascade estate. The house was a sprawling historic mansion that my parents had spent years meticulously restoring. It was their pride and joy, the ultimate symbol of their arrival in Atlanta's elite circles. They had always promised that the estate would be passed down to Jada and me, a tangible piece of generational wealth. But the document on Malik's screen told a different story. 6 months ago, Desmond and Brenda had signed a second mortgage on the property. The loan amount was staggering, essentially draining all the equity they had built up over decades. I stared at their signatures, my mind struggling to process the implications. "Why would they do this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They own the logistics company. They have money." "Connor pitched it as a bridge loan," Malik explained, his eyes fixed on the screen. He claimed he had secured a massive commercial waterfront development project, but needed temporary capital to close the deal. He promised them a guaranteed return that would double their investment within a year. They bought it completely. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. My parents had refused to co-sign a modest business loan when I started my PR firm, citing their strict policy of not mixing family with business. Yet they had willingly mortgaged their most prized possession, the very foundation of our family's legacy, to hand a fortune to Connor. "Where did the money go?" I asked, dreading the answer. Malik brought up a complex web of transactions. He used about a quarter of it to pay off his most aggressive private lenders, essentially keeping the wolves at bay. Another chunk went to maintaining his lifestyle here in Atlanta, the cars, the tailored suits, the extravagant dinners. He paused, pulling up a new document. "And then there's this." It was a lease agreement for a luxury penthouse condo in Miami, Florida. The lease was signed by Connor, but the primary resident was a woman named Valentina. Bank records showed regular monthly transfers from one of Connor's shell companies to an account in Valentina's name, easily covering the exorbitant rent and providing a generous allowance. "He's funding a mistress," I stated flatly. "A very expensive one," Malik confirmed. "He's using your parents' home equity and your father's business revenue to pay for her penthouse, her designer clothes, and his weekend getaways. The man is running a textbook Ponzi scheme on your family, Kendra, and the walls are closing in fast. The credit card declines tonight were just the beginning. His accounts are overdrawn. The stolen funds are gone. It is only a matter of days before the entire facade collapses." I sat back in my chair, the silence of the office pressing in on me. Jada had looked at me with such immense superiority at dinner. She had physically blocked me from eating, convinced she was the queen of a wealthy empire, utterly oblivious to the fact that her husband was a bankrupt fraud, funneling her family's money to a woman in Miami. Brenda and Desmond had publicly shamed me, demanding I show respect to the man who had secretly shackled them to massive debt they could likely never repay. They thought I was the failure. They thought I was the liability. "What do you want to do?" Malik asked, breaking the heavy silence. "I have enough documentation here to take to the federal authorities. We can hand this over to the FBI for wire fraud and embezzlement by tomorrow morning. We can end him." I looked at the glowing screens, tracing the lines of deception Connor had woven through my family. Taking this straight to the authorities would certainly punish him, but it would also allow Brenda, Desmond, and Jada to paint themselves strictly as helpless victims. They would spin a narrative of betrayal, seeking sympathy from their high society friends. They would never take accountability for their own complicity, for their blinding arrogance, or for the way they had treated me. They needed to face the consequences of their own vanity. "Do not send anything to the authorities yet." I instructed, my mind shifting into absolute crisis management mode. "Print everything out, compile the bank statements, the fake consulting invoices, the second mortgage deed, and the Miami lease agreement. Put it all into a physical binder." Malik raised an eyebrow. "You want to confront them privately?" "No," I said, standing up. "A private confrontation gives them room to manipulate the narrative. My parents are masters of sweeping dirt under the rug to protect their image. If I confront them in private, they will try to handle it quietly. They will sell the logistics company, downsize their lives, and cover Connor's tracks just to avoid the public humiliation of admitting they were conned. They will sacrifice everything they have left just to keep their country club friends from finding out." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the dark expanse of the Atlanta skyline. My firm protected clients from scandals exactly like this, but my family was not my client. "We are going to let them keep digging their grave," I said softly. "We are going to lock down my own assets to ensure their financial ruin does not somehow bleed over into my company. And then we are going to wait for the perfect moment to let the entire city see exactly what kind of legacy they have built." Malik smiled, a sharp, understanding expression. "I will get the binders ready." The morning after the restaurant incident, I was at my desk reviewing a client's crisis communication strategy when my assistant buzzed me. My parents were in the lobby demanding to see me without an appointment. I told her to send them up. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the voice memo app, hit record, and placed it face down on my desk. In Georgia, only one party needs to consent to a recording, and I was definitely consenting to this one. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. Desmond and Brenda marched in looking as pristine and polished as ever. My mother carried her designer handbag like a weapon, while my father wore his signature tailored suit. They did not look like people on the brink of federal bankruptcy. They looked indignant. They started immediately without a hello or asking how I was. Desmond pointed a finger at me, stating that my behavior at the restaurant was an embarrassment to the family name. Brenda chimed in, saying that Connor was under immense stress, finalizing a multi-million-dollar merger that would secure our family legacy for generations. They demanded I call Connor and apologize. I sat perfectly still, letting the silence stretch. I asked them why Connor, a supposedly brilliant developer, would be stressed over a simple dinner bill. Brenda scoffed, calling me financially ignorant. She stated that real wealth is tied up in assets and equity, not liquid cash. Then she handed me the exact admission I needed. She proudly declared that she and my father had recently transferred emergency funds to Connor to smooth over a minor liquidity issue for his new waterfront project. They had willingly handed over the cash to protect his investments. I nodded slowly, ensuring the microphone picked up every word of their arrogant confession. I told them I understood perfectly. Believing they had put me in my place, they warned me not to show my face at family gatherings until I could show proper respect. Then they walked out, leaving me with a crystal-clear audio recording of their financial complicity. The moment the office doors clicked shut, I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. The audio file was secured and backed up to multiple encrypted cloud servers. But their visit triggered a new, more dangerous thought. If Desmond and Brenda were blindly funneling money to Connor, their inevitable financial collapse would be monumental. In the world of high finance and corporate crisis, a blast radius like that destroys anyone standing too close. I needed to ensure my own financial perimeter was completely impenetrable. I called Malik back into my office and instructed him to pull a comprehensive credit and liability report on my personal and business profiles. We needed to guarantee that my name was absolutely unattached to any of Desmond's logistics accounts or Brenda's personal lines of credit. Malik ran the checks. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the rapid clicking of his keyboard. Then he stopped. He turned the monitor toward me, his expression grave. I stared at the digital document displayed on the screen. It was a commercial line of credit agreement dated 5 years ago, issued to Jada and Connor for their initial business ventures. At the bottom of the page, listed as a secondary guarantor, was my name. Next to it was my signature. My blood ran ice cold. I had never seen this document in my life. I had never authorized anyone to use my credit history to back my sister's husband. 5 years ago, I was just getting my public relations firm off the ground. My parents had refused to co-sign a modest business loan for me, claiming they never mixed family with business. Yet here was undeniable proof that they had forged my signature to leverage my pristine credit score to secure capital for their golden child. The betrayal went far beyond emotional abuse. They had actively committed fraud, risking my livelihood, my firm, and my entire future just to hand Connor a blank check. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. Sarah was not just my best friend. She was the most ruthless financial fraud attorney in Atlanta. When she arrived at my office 20 minutes later, she took one look at the digital document and the forensic binders Malik had prepared, and her eyes hardened into polished steel. She confirmed what I already knew. The signature was a highly skilled forgery, likely executed by Desmond, who had access to my old tax documents from when I first started my company. I told Sarah I wanted my name stripped from that document immediately, but I did not want Desmond or Connor alerted yet. Sarah drafted a highly confidential legal notice to the lending institution, accompanied by an affidavit from a forensic handwriting expert she kept on retainer. The notice legally severed my liability and flagged the document as fraudulent, forcing the bank to quietly freeze the line of credit for an internal audit. By the end of the day, my financial perimeter was secured. I was completely detached from the impending crater, but the strategic beauty of Sarah's maneuver was that it left Desmond and Brenda fully exposed. Without my pristine credit acting as a silent shield, the banks would soon start calling in the debts. Connor's house of cards was losing its structural integrity by the hour, and my parents had zero protection left. 2 weeks passed in total silence. I ignored every text from Jada and every passive-aggressive email from my mother. I focused entirely on my firm closing deals and managing real crises for actual billionaires. Then the mail arrived. My assistant handed me a thick, heavy envelope made of premium cardstock sealed with gold wax. I sliced it open. It was an invitation to a Black Excellence and Investment Gala to be held at the St. Regis Ballroom. The hosts listed at the top in elegant script were Desmond and Connor. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. Connor was drowning in millions of dollars of debt actively under investigation by private lenders and siphoning money from his father-in-law to pay his Miami mistress. Yet he was hosting a lavish gala to celebrate generational wealth. It did not take a crisis manager to see the true motive. The gala was a hunting ground. Connor and Desmond were planning to use their polished social standing to lure new, unsuspecting investors into the fold. They needed fresh capital to quietly cover the stolen funds and keep the Ponzi scheme afloat. A small, pale pink sticky note fell out of the invitation envelope. It was written in Jada's distinctive looping handwriting. "Come see what real success looks like. Try to wear something appropriate." I held the sticky note between my fingers. I looked over at the massive stack of forensic accounting binders Malik had meticulously assembled, detailing every shell company, every fake invoice, and every wire transfer to the mistress in Florida. The trap had presented itself flawlessly. They wanted me to witness their success. They wanted an audience. I picked up a heavy black fountain pen, checked the box marked "Yes" on the response card, and handed it to my assistant to mail. I was going to give them the exact audience they deserved. The gala was exactly as opulent as I expected. Valets rushed to park luxury cars, and security guards stood at attention at the entrance. I stepped out of my chauffeured car, wearing a custom-tailored emerald green gown that fit like a second skin. It was undeniable and show-stopping. Malik walked beside me, his tailored suit screaming understated power. Sarah joined us, radiating the kind of confidence only a top-tier attorney possesses. We were a formidable trio, and we owned the room the moment we stepped inside. The ballroom was packed with Atlanta's elite. Local politicians, high-net-worth investors, and socialites mingled, sipping champagne and exchanging business cards. Brenda and Jada were near the front holding court with a group of potential investors. They spotted me immediately. Brenda's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing as she took in my appearance. Jada looked confused, her gaze darting between my gown and my imposing companions. They were clearly unnerved by my presence, but they were too busy playing the roles of gracious hosts to confront me. I ignored them, blending into the crowd and positioning my team near the audio-visual booth. Malik slipped away quietly while Sarah and I engaged in polite conversation with a few acquaintances. I kept my eyes on the stage, waiting for the performance to begin. Connor soon took the microphone, his smile wide and practiced. He looked a little shiny, perhaps sweating under the bright stage lights, but he projected an air of absolute confidence. He started his speech with a long, self-congratulatory monologue about building generational wealth and securing the family's legacy. He praised Desmond and Brenda for their unwavering trust and vision, painting himself as the architect of their combined success. He then seamlessly transitioned into pitching a new exclusive funding round for his latest waterfront development project. It was a masterful performance full of buzzwords and empty promises. Desmond nodded proudly from the front row, while Jada beamed, soaking in the admiration of the crowd. As Connor paused for applause, asking if anyone had questions or wanted to share a few words, I stepped forward. I moved with calm, deliberate purpose, the crowd parting slightly as I approached the stage. Connor's smile tightened when he saw me. He stepped forward subtly, trying to block my path to the microphone. But Malik materialized from the shadows, his presence a silent warning. Connor hesitated, stepping back just enough for me to take the microphone. I smiled at the audience, my voice smooth and resonant. "Thank you, Connor, for that inspiring vision," I began. As Desmond and Brenda's daughter and Jada's sister, I felt it was only fitting to offer a toast tonight. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. A toast to truth in business and the absolute necessity of transparency in building a lasting family legacy. The crowd murmured appreciatively, captivated by my poise. Jada glared at me, clearly thinking I was trying to steal her spotlight. I gave a subtle nod to Malik, who had positioned himself at the soundboard. The massive projector screens behind Connor, which had been displaying polished architectural mock-ups, flickered. The images vanished, replaced by Malik's forensic accounting flowcharts. A wave of confusion rippled through the ballroom. I turned to the screens, my voice chillingly calm as I narrated the evidence now displayed for all to see. "Transparency is vital," I continued. For instance, it's important to understand the structure of the shell companies Connor has used to drain the operating accounts of my father's logistics firm. The screen zoomed in on the fake consulting invoices and the corresponding wire transfers. The confusion in the room shifted to shock. I didn't stop. It's also crucial to be transparent about leverage, I said as the screen switched to the second mortgage documents for the Cascade estate, complete with Desmond and Brenda's forged signatures, such as secretly mortgaging the family's historic estate to cover mounting personal debts. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Desmond gripped the edge of his chair, his face ashen. I delivered the final blow. The screen flashed to the bank statements highlighting the $12,000 monthly transfers to the Miami penthouse. I turned to face Jada, directly locking eyes with her. "You told me not to fill my plate because I didn't pay for it," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. I sat in the glow of the dual monitors in my private office, the silence heavy after my parents' departure. The audio file of their arrogant confession was securely uploaded, but a new, far more dangerous urgency thrummed in my veins. Desmond and Brenda were not just enabling a fraudster. They were actively funneling emergency liquidity into a sinking ship. When a Ponzi scheme collapses, the blast radius does not respect family ties. It destroys anyone standing too close. As the CEO of a crisis management firm, my first rule of engagement is always to secure the perimeter. I needed to ensure my own financial fortress was completely impenetrable. I buzzed Malik on the intercom and told him to drop whatever client file he was managing. Within seconds, he was walking through my door, his tablet already in hand. I told him I needed a comprehensive deep dive audit on every single piece of financial data attached to my name, my social security number, and my firm's federal tax identification number. I wanted a relentless scrub of my credit reports, asset liabilities, and any dormant accounts extending back a decade. I needed to guarantee that my name was absolutely unattached to any of Desmond's logistics accounts or Brenda's personal lines of credit. Malik did not ask questions. He understood the stakes. He sat at the glass conference table across from my desk, connected his laptop to my secure network, and went to work. For nearly 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rapid, rhythmic typing of his keyboard. I poured myself a glass of water, pacing the length of my office, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. I had built my firm brick by brick, navigating the cutthroat corporate world as a black woman without a safety net. I could not let my parents' blinding vanity drag my empire into the mud. The typing stopped. I turned around. Malik was staring at his screen, his jaw set in a tight, hard line. He did not look up at me right away. In the years we had spent putting out fires for politicians and billionaires, I had only seen Malik look like that twice. Both times involved federal indictments. "Tell me," I commanded, walking over to stand behind him. He turned the monitor toward me. "I think you need to look at this," he said, his voice stripped of its usual smooth confidence. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the digital document displayed on the screen. It was a commercial line of credit agreement from Atlanta Metropolitan Bank, dated exactly 5 years ago. The primary account holders listed at the top of the application were Jada and Connor. It was the initial seed capital they had used to launch Connor's supposedly booming real estate development firm. I frowned, confused as to why Malik was pulling up my sister's debt. Then I scrolled to the bottom of the page. There, listed as a secondary guarantor, was my name, Kendra Elise Washington, and right next to the printed text was my signature. The air in my office seemed to vanish. My blood ran ice cold, freezing the breath in my lungs. I reached out and touched the screen, tracing the digital ink of the signature. It was my handwriting. The distinct loop of the K, the sharp angle of the W. It was a flawless replication. But I had never seen this document in my life. I had never stepped foot in Atlanta Metropolitan Bank to back my sister's husband. Malik brought up the supporting documentation attached to the loan file. To secure a guarantor of my caliber, the bank required extensive financial disclosures. Attached to the fraudulent loan agreement were copies of my personal tax returns, my firm's initial incorporation papers, and my unredacted credit report from 5 years ago. My mind violently snapped back to that exact time period. 5 years ago, I was 30 years old, taking the ultimate risk to scale my crisis management firm. I had just signed a major political client and needed to upgrade from my small shared workspace to a proper downtown office to project the right level of authority. The commercial landlord required a $20,000 guarantor signature because my firm's new revenue streams were not yet fully established on paper. I had gone to Desmond and Brenda sitting at their massive dining room table in Cascade, asking them to co-sign the lease just for the first 12 months. I remembered my father's exact words. He had leaned back in his custom chair swirling his bourbon and delivered a lecture on self-reliance. He told me that Black excellence meant building it yourself. He said that handing me a shortcut would only weaken my character. My mother had chimed in, stating firmly that they simply did not mix family with business. They sent me away empty-handed. I had to drain my emergency savings, sell my car, and leverage everything I owned to secure that office lease on my own. Yet during that exact same month, my parents had taken the tax documents I had foolishly left on their home office printer. They had forged my signature. They had handed my pristine credit score, my hard-earned financial stability, and the future of my fledgling company over to Connor. They had gifted a white man they barely knew a massive line of credit, using my blood, sweat, and tears as the collateral, all because he fit the image they wanted for Jada. The betrayal went far beyond emotional abuse or dinner table insults. This was not about a piece of bread at an upscale restaurant. They had actively committed felony fraud. They had put a loaded gun to the head of my empire. If Connor defaulted on that line of credit, and Malik's forensic dive had already proven Connor was defaulting on absolutely everything, the bank had the legal right to seize my firm's operating accounts. They could garnish my wages. They could liquidate the company I had built from nothing. My parents had risked my entire life to fund Connor's illusions. I stood up, stepping away from the monitor. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass against the wall. The anger that washed over me was not hot or explosive. It was absolute sub-zero winter. It was a cold, chilling fury that sharpened my vision and slowed my heartbeat to a steady, predatory rhythm. Malik watched me carefully. "Do you want me to call the bank?" he asked softly. "No," I replied, my voice steady and deadly calm. "We do not call customer service for a felony. We call Sarah." Sarah was my closest confidant, but more importantly, she was the most ruthless financial fraud attorney in the state of Georgia. I picked up my cell phone and dialed her private number. She answered on the first ring. I told her to drop whatever she was doing and get to my office immediately. I told her I had a forged commercial loan document and I needed a kill switch. I hung up the phone and walked back to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked out over the city I had conquered on my own terms. My parents had sold me out for a man who was currently bleeding them dry to pay for a mistress in Miami. They had prioritized the golden child to the point of criminality. They thought I was just the independent daughter who could take the hits and keep standing. They thought I was a resource to be mined, an asset to be leveraged without my consent. They were about to find out exactly why high-profile politicians and corporate executives paid me exorbitant retainers to destroy their enemies. I was going to surgically detach myself from their sinking ship, and I was going to leave them holding the bag for every single dime Connor had stolen. The golden child and her perfect husband were going to bring down the entire family legacy, and I was going to watch it burn from my penthouse. Sarah breezes past my receptionist exactly 22 minutes after I hung up the phone. She is wearing a sharp, tailored suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, and radiating the kind of aggressive competence that makes opposing counsel sweat. We have been friends since our undergraduate days at Spelman College. She knows my family dynamic intimately. She knows about the golden child syndrome that has dominated my life. She knows about my parents and their endless obsession with status and appearances. But knowing about their toxic behavior and looking at a forged commercial loan document are two very different things. I point to the monitor on my desk. Malik brings up the high-resolution scan of the signature page. Sarah drops her briefcase onto the glass table, leans over the screen, and lets out a low, sharp exhale. "They actually did it," Sarah says, her voice tight with absolute disbelief. They committed felony wire fraud and identity theft to bankroll that walking red flag of a husband. I need it gone, I tell her, maintaining my absolute calm. I need my name stripped from this line of credit before Connor misses his next payment cycle, and the bank comes looking to liquidate my firm to cover his bad debts. Sarah does not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She opens her briefcase and pulls out a secure laptop. We are not just removing your name, she says, her fingers flying across the keys. We are detonating the bridge entirely. If we simply ask them to remove you, it alerts your parents and Connor. They will try to cover their tracks or pressure you into staying on as a guarantor to protect the family name. We need a tactical strike that locks the bank out of your accounts permanently without giving your family a chance to intervene. She makes a quick phone call to a forensic handwriting expert she keeps on retainer for high-stakes corporate litigation. Within an hour, the expert is on a secure video conference with us, analyzing the digital signature against a dozen verified samples of my actual handwriting from legal contracts. It takes him less than 5 minutes to confirm what I already knew. The pressure points, the hesitation marks, and the angle of the strokes are all fundamentally wrong. The forgery is highly skilled, clearly practiced, but undeniably fake. It bears all the hallmark traits of someone trying to mimic my signature by meticulously tracing an old tax document. Someone exactly like my father. Sarah drafts a blistering, highly confidential legal notice directed to the Chief Risk Officer and the General Counsel of Atlanta Metropolitan Bank. The document is a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It includes the sworn affidavit from the forensic handwriting expert. It explicitly states that my signature was forged, that I have zero affiliation with Connor and his real estate development firm, and that any attempt to leverage my personal assets or my corporate credit history will result in immediate federal litigation against the banking institution for failing to verify the identity of a guarantor. We are filing a preemptive cease and desist, Sarah explains, reviewing the final draft on her screen. We are legally severing your liability and flagging the original loan document as a fraudulent instrument. The moment the bank legal department receives this protocol, dictates they must immediately freeze the entire line of credit to conduct an internal fraud audit. I nod, seeing the sheer brilliance of the maneuver. Will they alert Connor and my parents? I ask. Eventually, yes, Sarah replies with a sharp, calculating smile. But not before the bank locks down every single cent of available capital. Once the risk assessment team looks at Connor account to investigate the fraud claim, they are going to see exactly what Malik just found. They will see the missed payments, the plummeting revenue, and the absolute lack of commercial development. The bank will panic. They will instantly reclassify the entire loan portfolio as high risk. Malik, who has been quietly monitoring the network from the conference table, chimes in. Without your pristine credit score acting as the structural integrity for that loan, Connor business profile cannot carry the debt. The bank will demand immediate repayment in full to mitigate their exposure. They will call in the loan. The pieces lock into place perfectly in my mind. By cutting myself free, I am inadvertently pulling the final support column out from under Connor and his crumbling empire. When the bank calls in the debt, Connor will have no liquid cash to give them. He has already bled dry the $800,000 second mortgage on my parents' Cascade estate. He has drained my father logistics operating accounts to pay for his Miami mistress. My parents had forged my name to protect themselves from liability while funding Jada lavish lifestyle. They thought they had insulated themselves from the risk. They thought my success was a silent, endless safety net they could exploit whenever they needed capital to maintain their facade. By legally detonating my connection to the loan, Desmond and Brenda are now fully exposed. When the bank comes to collect, and Connor inevitably defaults, the bank will seize whatever collateral is left. And the only collateral left in this entire toxic equation is the equity my parents foolishly handed over to him. Send it, I tell Sarah. She hits the button. The encrypted legal packet is dispatched directly to the bank general counsel. It is done, Sarah says, closing her laptop with a satisfying snap. Your financial perimeter is completely locked down. They cannot touch your firm. They cannot touch your personal accounts. You are an untouchable island, Kendra. I look out the window at the bustling city below. I do not feel a shred of guilt. Guilt is an emotion reserved for people who make mistakes. I did not make a mistake. I survived. My parents made their bed when they chose the illusion of Connor wealth over the reality of my hard work. They chose a fraudulent son-in-law over their own flesh and blood. They committed a felony against me simply to keep up appearances at their country club and buy expensive dinners they could not afford. Now they are standing completely unprotected in the path of a financial hurricane. The banks are coming. The private creditors are circling. Connor's massive web of lies is unraveling by the hour. And they have absolutely no idea that their silent safety net just vanished. Malik packs up his physical binders, organizing the mountain of evidence against Connor. The fake invoices, the shell company registrations, the luxury penthouse lease in Miami. He places the heavy stack neatly on the corner of my desk. We have the weapon, Malik says quietly. We have the shield. What is the next move? We wait, I reply, letting a cold, calm certainty wash over me. We let them keep living their lie for just a little while longer. We let them gather their high society friends. We wait for the absolute perfect moment to let the rest of Atlanta see exactly what is hiding behind their closed doors. I had told Malik we were going to wait for the perfect moment. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor because that moment arrived exactly 14 days later, delivered by certified mail. My executive assistant walked into my office holding a thick, oversized envelope. It was crafted from heavy midnight blue cardstock, sealed with an ostentatious gold wax stamp bearing the intertwined initials of my family's last name and Connor's. It screamed new money, trying desperately to look like old money. I sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener. Inside rested a lavish gold-foiled invitation. The bold, embossed letters announced the inaugural Black Excellence and Regional Investment Gala. The venue was the St. Regis Ballroom, an aggressively expensive choice that required a massive upfront deposit, and they're listed at the very top as the visionary co-hosts and keynote speakers were Desmond and Connor. I read the ornate text detailing an evening dedicated to celebrating generational wealth, commercial innovation, and exclusive investment opportunities. As a crisis manager who handles the fallout for actual billionaires, I did not see a celebration. I saw a hunting ground. Connor was drowning. The bank was undoubtedly closing in on the commercial line of credit Sarah had just detonated. His private lenders were circling like sharks. The $800,000 he had drained from my parents' second mortgage was gone, squandered on luxury cars and his Miami mistress. He needed fresh capital, and he needed it fast. This gala was a desperate, high-stakes grift. Desmond and Connor were planning to use their polished social standing and my father's legitimate business legacy to lure new, unsuspecting investors into the fold. They were going to pass the hat around Atlanta's elite to silently cover Connor's stolen funds and keep the Ponzi scheme afloat for another few months. My father, blinded by his desperate need to be seen as a kingmaker, was willingly serving as the bait to his own community. As I slid the invitation back into its sleeve, a small, pale pink square of paper fluttered to the surface of my glass desk. It was a sticky note written in Jada's distinctive looping cursive. I picked it up. The message was short, dripping with the kind of unearned arrogance only my sister could muster. Come see what real success looks like. Try to wear something appropriate. I held the pink square between my fingers, letting the sheer audacity of her words wash over me. Jada was entirely oblivious to her husband's fraud. She was floating on a cloud of stolen money, completely unaware that the designer dresses she wore and the vintage champagne she drank were funded by her father's bleeding accounts and a fraudulent line of credit bearing my forged signature. She genuinely believed she was sitting at the pinnacle of Atlanta society, looking down on her older sister, the humble freelancer she loved to pity. She wanted me there not as family, but as a prop. She wanted an audience for her triumph. She wanted me to stand in the corner in a modest dress, watching her play the queen of a wealthy empire, serving as the ultimate contrast to her manufactured perfection. In her mind, my presence would validate her choices and highlight my supposed failures. I slowly lifted my gaze from the pink note and looked across my desk. There, stacked in a neat, imposing tower, were the heavy forensic accounting binders Malik had meticulously assembled. Inside those black covers lay the complete anatomy of Connor's destruction. Every shell company registration was tabbed and highlighted. Every fake consulting invoice billed to my father's logistics firm was cross-referenced. The forged second mortgage deed on the Cascade estate sat perfectly preserved in a clear sleeve. The lease agreement for the luxury penthouse condo in Florida was neatly clipped to the bank statements, highlighting the $12,000 monthly transfers to a woman who was definitely not Jada. A private confrontation would have allowed Desmond and Brenda to sweep this under the rug. If I walked into their house with these binders, they would have sold off their remaining assets downsized in secret and paid off Connor's debts, just to avoid the public humiliation of admitting they were conned by a man who sold them a fake dream. They would have protected him to protect themselves. But a public gala, packed with the city's most powerful politicians, high net worth investors, and the very socialites my mother was so desperate to impress, that was an entirely different arena. There would be no sweeping this away. There would be nowhere to hide. I called Malik and Sarah into my office to share the news. When I slid the gold-foiled invitation and the pink sticky note across the glass table, Sarah let out a low, predatory chuckle. Malik just shook his head, amazed by the sheer hubris of the men we were about to dismantle. I told them we were all attending. We needed to be positioned strategically throughout the ballroom. Malik would need direct access to the audiovisual booth, utilizing his technical expertise to ensure our presentation could override whatever self-congratulatory slideshow Connor had prepared. Sarah would be my legal shield, ready to intercept any immediate threats of defamation lawsuits the moment the truth hit the projector screens. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the ballroom layout, treating the gala not as a family gathering, but as a hostile corporate takeover. Every variable was calculated. Every exit route was secured. My family thought they had cornered me into playing the role of the envious lesser sister. Instead, they had handed a master crisis manager the keys to their own execution chamber. I picked up a heavy black fountain pen. I pulled the gold-embossed response card from the envelope. I checked the box marked yes. I did not write a petty note back. I did not send a sarcastic text or call my mother to argue about the disrespect. The time for engaging in their petty sibling rivalry was over. I handed the RSVP card to my assistant and instructed her to have it couriered directly to the event planners. I sat back in my chair looking out over the Atlanta skyline. They wanted me to witness their success. They wanted me to see how the real players operate. They had demanded I wear something appropriate for the occasion. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression reflecting in the glass of my office window. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to step into their carefully constructed illusion, wearing absolute power, and I was going to let the entire city watch as I burned their counterfeit empire to the ground. I picked up my phone and dialed my personal stylist. I told her I needed a custom gown for a high society event at the St. Regis, something that commanded the room the second I walked through the doors. It was time to show my family what real success actually looked like. The heavy glass doors of the St. Regis ballroom swung open, unleashing a wave of low jazz and the unmistakable hum of high-stakes networking. I stepped over the threshold, letting the heavy, humid Atlanta night air slip away behind me. The emerald green silk of my custom-tailored gown cascaded perfectly to the floor, catching the light from the massive crystal chandeliers overhead. It was a dress designed not just to be seen, but to completely alter the center of gravity in any room. It did not whisper, it commanded. Malik walked to my right. His charcoal-tailored suit was immaculate, projecting the quiet, lethal authority of a man who held the keys to buried secrets. Sarah flanked my left in a sharp, structured crimson pantsuit, her gaze sweeping the perimeter with the predatory calculation of a prosecutor assessing a hostile courtroom. We did not look like family members arriving to support a sister. We looked like a corporate execution squad. The ballroom was a masterpiece of manufactured opulence. White orchids spilled from towering golden vases on every table. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with trays of vintage champagne and caviar hors d'oeuvres. It was a dazzling facade funded by the very fraud we were about to expose. Connor had pulled out all the stops to project absolute solvency. I scanned the crowd. The room was packed with the exact demographic Connor needed to fleece. Local politicians seeking campaign donors, retired athletes looking for passive income streams, and old money. Atlanta families polite enough to listen to a pitch, but shrewd enough to smell desperation. My father, Desmond, was working the room near the front, clapping men on the shoulder and leveraging decades of his hard-earned logistics reputation to vouch for his son-in-law. He was unknowingly co-signing his own financial execution. Connor stood at the center of a group of potential marks near the main stage. He wore a velvet dinner jacket that tried a bit too hard, a glass of bourbon in one hand, while he gestured expansively with the other. Even from 50 feet away, I could spot the subtle sheen of sweat on his forehead. It was the physical manifestation of a man drowning in millions of dollars of debt while trying to sell a dream. And then there was Jada. She stood beside Connor, draped in a heavily sequined silver dress, playing the role of the devoted, wealthy wife. She laughed at something a city councilman said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Beside her, my mother, Brenda, held a crystal flute, adjusting her diamond necklace and nodding along with the conversation. They were completely immersed in their delusion, treating the evening as their ultimate coronation. We moved down the grand staircase and stepped onto the main floor. The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate. Heads turned, conversations paused. In the insular world of Atlanta's black elite, true power has a specific frequency, and my team was broadcasting it at maximum volume. Several high-profile clients I had personally shielded from media disasters recognized me. A state senator raised his glass in my direction. The chief executive of a major tech conglomerate offered a respectful nod. The ripple of attention finally reached my family. Brenda saw me first. She was mid-sentence regaling an older couple with some fabricated story of family success when her eyes locked onto me. Her jaw went slack. The polished society matriarch's smile slid right off her face. I watched the cognitive dissonance short-circuit her brain. She had expected the struggling, jealous freelancer. She had expected me to slink in wearing an off-the-rack department store dress, intimidated by the wealth surrounding me. Instead, she was looking at a woman who radiated more undeniable financial power than anyone else in the room. She grabbed Jada's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the silver sequins. Jada turned, annoyance flashing across her features before her eyes found me. The sheer shock on my sister's face was deeply satisfying. Jada's gaze darted frantically from the immaculate cut of my emerald silk gown to the heavy, understated diamonds at my throat, and finally to the imposing presence of Malik and Sarah flanking me. Her mind struggled to compute the visual data. This did not fit the narrative she had aggressively pushed. I was supposed to be the family embarrassment. I was supposed to be the cautionary tale. I was not supposed to look like I could buy the entire hotel and fire everyone inside it. I did not break my stride. I maintained a cool, neutral expression, holding Jada's wide-eyed stare for exactly 3 seconds before dismissing her completely and looking away. I dismissed her the exact same way she had dismissed me over a piece of bread at her birthday dinner. The ultimate insult is not anger. It is absolute indifference. I saw Brenda take a step forward, her protective instincts warring with her confusion. She desperately wanted to march over, grab my arm, and demand to know how I afforded my outfit and who my formidable companions were. She wanted to reassert her control, but she could not. She was surrounded by the exact high-net-worth investors Connor desperately needed to charm. Making a scene with her own daughter in the middle of a fundraising gala would shatter the illusion of their perfect, unified family legacy. She was trapped in the very cage of social etiquette she had built. Brenda forcefully pulled Jada back, whispering harshly into her ear. They forced their strained smiles back into place and turned their attention back to the investors, though their eyes kept darting nervously in my direction. They were neutralized by their own vanity. We glided smoothly through the crowd, avoiding the center of the room where my family was congregating. I steered us toward the perimeter, greeting a few actual billionaires who understood the value of my crisis management firm. I engaged in brief, polite small talk, ensuring that Brenda and Jada could see me effortlessly networking with the highest tier of wealth in the room, the tier they were desperately trying to penetrate. While I held the attention of a prominent venture capitalist, Malik slipped away from my side. His movement was fluid and entirely unnoticed by the crowd. He navigated the shadows of the ballroom, making his way toward the raised platform that housed the audiovisual control booth. Connor had set up two massive high-definition projector screens flanking the main stage, currently displaying a looping, sterile slideshow of architectural renderings and generic corporate buzzwords. It was the visual bait for his trap. Malik approached the technician, a young guy in a polo shirt who looked incredibly bored. With a flash of his corporate credentials and a polite, authoritative tone, Malik informed the technician that he was part of the keynote speaker's media team and needed to verify the presentation feeds. The technician stepped aside without a second thought. Malik smoothly connected a highly encrypted flash drive to the primary control console. He ran a quick diagnostic check, his fingers flying across the terminal. The payload was loaded. The forensic accounting flowcharts, the shell company deeds, the forged mortgage documents, and the Miami penthouse bank statements were all queued up and ready to override the main feed at my exact signal. Across the room, Sarah had completed her own tactical sweep. She drifted back to my side, seamlessly rejoining the conversation I was wrapping up with the venture capitalist. As he walked away, Sarah leaned in close, her voice a low murmur masked by the clinking of champagne flutes and the steady beat of the jazz band. Security is standard hotel staff, she reported, her eyes tracking the exits. 3 guards at the main doors, 2 by the service elevators. They are here to check invitations, not to handle a corporate implosion. Once the truth hits those screens and the investors realize they are being pitched a federal crime, the room is going to tear itself apart. Connor will not have the muscle to stop you or force us out. We have complete operational control. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, my eyes tracking Connor as he shook hands with a local politician. His fake smile stretched tight across his face. Desmond stood proudly beside him, oblivious to the fact that the man he was championing had already robbed him blind. Jada was glaring at me from across the ballroom, her initial shock curdling into raw, jealous anger. They thought they had invited a victim to watch their triumph. They had no idea they had invited the executioner. Everything is in place, Malik confirmed, materializing beside us. He adjusted his cuffs, his posture relaxed but ready. The override is primed. The moment you give the word, his shiny little slideshow goes dark and the receipts go live. I placed my glass on the passing waiter's tray. The heavy fabric of my emerald gown rustled as I shifted my weight, turning my attention fully to the main stage. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the start of the evening's formal program. The low hum of networking chatter faded as guests turned their attention toward the podium. I stood perfectly still in the dimming light, ready to let the entire city watch as I burned their counterfeit empire to the ground. The stage was set, and Connor stepped up to the podium, the microphone catching the slight tremor in his hand. He smoothed his velvet lapel, a gesture that was meant to project confidence, but instead betrayed his underlying anxiety. The spotlight caught the bead of sweat on his forehead, a physical manifestation of the immense pressure he was under to pull off this multi-million-dollar con. The audience, a mix of Atlanta's elite and potential investors, fell silent, their attention fully captured by the man they believed to be a visionary real estate developer. Connor cleared his throat, his voice booming across the ballroom. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his tone dripping with practiced charisma. "We are gathered to celebrate not just a milestone in real estate, but the very essence of building generational wealth." He paused, letting the phrase linger in the air, a buzzword designed to resonate with the affluent crowd. He swept his gaze across the room, ensuring he made eye contact with key figures, politicians, venture capitalists, and the socialites my parents were so desperate to impress. "When I founded this firm," Connor continued, his voice swelling with false humility, "my vision was to create spaces that transcend the ordinary. We are not just building structures, we are building communities, legacies that will stand the test of time." He gestured toward the massive projector screens behind him, which currently displayed a looping, sterile slideshow of architectural renderings and generic corporate jargon. It was a masterpiece of illusion, a visual symphony of success designed to mask the absolute insolvency of his operation. I watched him from my vantage point near the audio-visual booth, my expression neutral. He was selling a dream, a highly lucrative, entirely fictitious dream. He spoke of strategic investments, waterfront developments, and the importance of visionary leadership. He peppered his speech with industry jargon, creating a veneer of expertise that was as thin as the paper his forged documents were printed on. None of this would be possible without the unwavering support of my incredible family, Connor said, turning his attention to the front row. My father-in-law, Desmond, a pillar of the Atlanta business community, recognized the potential in my vision from day one. Desmond, sitting proudly in the front row, nodded solemnly, oblivious to the fact that his legacy was currently being siphoned to fund Connor's Miami mistress. Connor then turned his gaze to my mother. And Brenda, the matriarch who understands that true wealth requires bold strategic investments. Brenda smiled, adjusting her diamond necklace, utterly unaware that the very home she lived in had been mortgaged to bankroll the man singing her praises. And of course, my beautiful wife, Jada, Connor said, his voice dropping an octave to convey a false intimacy. She is the driving force behind everything I do, my partner in building an empire that will provide for our children and their children. Jada beamed, her sequined dress catching the light as she soaked in the admiration of the crowd. She looked across the room, her eyes finding mine, a smug, victorious smile playing on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought this gala was the ultimate validation of her choices and the final condemnation of mine. Connor was building to his climax the moment he would launch the trap. Tonight, he announced, his voice ringing with manufactured enthusiasm, I am thrilled to announce an exclusive new funding round for our upcoming waterfront project. This is a rare opportunity to invest in a development that will reshape the Atlanta skyline and deliver unprecedented returns. He laid out the terms, the minimum investment amounts, the projected timelines, the entire fabricated pitch designed to extract millions from the people sitting in the ballroom. The room buzzed with polite applause and murmured conversations. Investors were taking notes, intrigued by the illusion Connor had so masterfully constructed. He was presenting himself as the savior of the family legacy, the brilliant architect of a new era of prosperity. Desmond nodded approvingly, while Jada's smile widened. They were entirely captivated by the performance, completely blind to the fact that the stage they were standing on was built over a sinkhole. I stood perfectly still, the emerald silk of my gown rustling softly as I shifted my weight. The air in the ballroom felt thick with anticipation, the kind of heavy atmosphere that precedes a storm. Connor had laid the bait. He had spun his web of lies and presented it as a masterpiece of financial acumen. He had praised my parents for their blind complicity and positioned himself as the mastermind of their continued success. The tension in the room was palpable, a delicate balance between the illusion of wealth and the reality of imminent collapse. I watched Connor conclude his pitch, asking if anyone had questions or wanted to say a few words. He was expecting polite inquiries, perhaps a few congratulations from prominent guests. He was not expecting the crisis manager he had insulted at dinner to step up to the microphone. The execution was primed. It was time to pull the trigger. As the polite applause rippled through the ballroom, I took my first step. The emerald silk of my gown caught the light, and the crowd naturally parted, sensing the sudden shift in gravity. I walked directly down the center aisle, my eyes locked on the podium. Connor saw me approaching, and the practiced, charismatic smile on his face instantly cracked. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white under the bright stage lights. He leaned into the microphone to quickly wrap up the segment and introduce the jazz band, but he was far too slow. I was already at the foot of the stage stairs. He moved to block the steps, trying to play it off as a welcoming, familial gesture while aggressively invading my personal space. His hand reached out to grip my arm, intending to guide me away from the microphone with a forced chuckle. Before his fingers could even brush the fabric of my dress, Malik materialized from my right side. Malik did not say a word. He simply stepped between Connor and me, planting his large, broad-shouldered frame on the first step. The sheer physical authority my chief operating officer projected was absolute. Connor looked up at Malik, swallowed hard, and instinctively took a step back, yielding the high ground. I glided past them both, ascending the stairs and stepping directly up to the microphone. The sprawling ballroom fell into a hushed, expectant silence. I adjusted the microphone stand with a calm, deliberate motion. I looked out over the sea of faces: politicians, venture capitalists, real estate moguls, and wealthy socialites all stared back at me, captivated by the disruption in the usual gala programming. In the front row, Desmond looked utterly bewildered. Brenda clutched her sequined purse, her eyes wide with a volatile mixture of fear and embarrassment. But it was Jada whose expression was the most deeply satisfying. She sat stiffly in her chair, glaring at me with raw, undisguised fury. She truly believed I had crashed her husband's grand triumph simply to steal her spotlight. She thought this was an act of petty sibling rivalry. She had absolutely no idea she was sitting at ground zero of a financial detonation. I smiled warmly at the audience, projecting the polished, untouchable aura of a seasoned chief executive. "Thank you, Connor, for that sweeping presentation." I began, my voice ringing clear and steady across the massive room. As Desmond and Brenda's daughter, and as Jada's older sister, I felt it was only appropriate that I come up here tonight to offer a few words. A toast, if you will, to the themes Connor so passionately outlined for all of you. I paused, letting the silence command the room. In my line of work, dealing with corporate crises and public relations at the highest levels, we talk a lot about legacy. We talk about what it means to build something that truly lasts. Connor spoke eloquently tonight about visionary leadership and strategic investments. But the foundation of any true legacy, the absolute bedrock of generational wealth, is not flashy architectural renderings or empty promises. It is truth. It is absolute, unflinching transparency. I paced slowly across the stage, owning the space completely. I made direct eye contact with a prominent angel investor sitting 2 tables away. When we ask investors to part with their hard-earned capital, we owe them absolute clarity. We owe them the ugly realities, not just the beautiful concepts, because a building constructed on a compromised foundation will inevitably collapse, taking everyone inside down with it. I turned my gaze back to the front row. Desmond was nodding slowly, completely missing the subtext, genuinely thinking I was praising his business ethics. Brenda looked marginally relieved, perhaps hoping I was extending a public olive branch to save face in front of her country club friends. Jada still looked ready to scream, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, her jaw tight with resentment. In the world of high finance, I continued, my tone growing sharper and more precise. Transparency is not just a corporate buzzword. It is a strict legal obligation. It requires us to open the books. It requires us to show exactly where the money comes from, and more importantly, exactly where the money goes. A true visionary does not hide behind shell companies. A true leader does not use the goodwill and pristine credit of their own family as a shield for insolvency. The atmosphere in this ballroom shifted drastically. The polite interest from the crowd sharpened into intense, calculating focus. The experienced investors in the room recognized the sudden shift in my rhetoric. The fluffy marketing buzzwords were gone. I was speaking the cold, hard language of forensic risk assessment. Connor shifted uncomfortably behind me. I could hear his breathing turn shallow and erratic. He knew exactly what was happening. He recognized the tone. It was the sound of his carefully constructed web tearing apart piece by piece. "We are here tonight to celebrate the future of this family's investments," I said, projecting my voice to reach the very back of the opulent room. "But to understand the future, we must shine a blinding light on the present. We must look past the tailored suits, the rented venues, and the vintage champagne. We must look at the receipts, because receipts do not lie. Receipts do not care about your social standing or your country club memberships. Receipts reveal exactly who is footing the bill and who is simply feeding off the host." I turned to look directly at my sister. Her furious expression faltered, replaced by a sudden creeping confusion. She did not understand the financial terminology I was deploying, but she recognized the absolute predatory conviction in my voice. She knew deep down that I was not there to play games over dinner bills or sibling jealousy. I was there to execute a demolition. I looked back at the crowd, letting my gaze sweep over the hundreds of wealthy guests who had brought their checkbooks tonight, expecting to buy into a lucrative commercial dream. I am going to show you exactly what transparency looks like, I promised them, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I am going to show you the exact unredacted blueprint of Connor's empire. I raised my left hand a millimeter of movement that Malik had been watching for like a hawk. The massive projector screens behind Connor flickered. The sleek rendered images of non-existent glass towers vanished. In their place, a stark clinical flowchart bloomed across the screens in high definition. It was Malik's masterpiece, a forensic autopsy of a fraud. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. People squinted, trying to make sense of the sudden change in visuals. They expected to see profit projections. Instead, they were looking at a complex web of LLCs, wire transfers, and offshore accounts. Connor spun around, his eyes widening as he took in the flowchart. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking completely, forgetting the microphone in front of me. He turned toward the audiovisual booth. "Cut the feed. Cut the feed right now." But the technician was gone, and Malik stood guard at the console, arms crossed, ignoring Connor entirely. "What you are looking at," I said, my voice cutting through the rising confusion, "is the actual blueprint of the firm you are being asked to invest in tonight." I took a step away from the podium, owning the entire stage, forcing the audience to focus on the screens. Connor has spent the last 20 minutes talking about building communities and securing legacies, but let us look at what he has actually built. I pointed to the largest box on the screen, labeled with Connor's firm name. This is the primary development company. According to public records, this entity has not pulled a single commercial building permit in 3 years. It has no active construction sites. It has no payroll. The murmurs grew louder, shifting from confusion to alarm. The seasoned investors in the room were already doing the math. If the firm is generating zero revenue, I continued, pacing slowly. Where is the capital coming from to maintain this opulent lifestyle? Where did the money come from to rent this ballroom? I clicked a remote hidden in my palm. The slide changed. The screen now displayed redacted bank statements from my father's logistics company. Desmond, sitting in the front row, let out a strangled gasp. He recognized the account numbers instantly. The capital, I stated, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers, came from a series of systematic, unauthorized transfers from the operating accounts of a completely separate logistics firm. I highlighted the outgoing payments. $20,000 a month, $30,000 a month, billed as management consulting fees to a shell company registered to a post office box in Delaware, a shell company wholly owned by Connor. The ballroom erupted. People were standing up, pointing at the screens. The politicians looked terrified instantly, calculating the optics of being photographed at a fraudulent fundraising event. Desmond slumped back in his chair, his hands trembling as he stared at the undeniable proof of his own financial hemorrhage. Brenda grabbed his arm, her face a mask of sheer panic. Connor was frantic. He lunged toward the microphone, trying to wrestle it from its stand. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled family member trying to cause a scene. Security." But no one moved to help him. The security guards at the door were not equipped to handle a forensic presentation of federal crimes, and they certainly were not going to intervene while the city's most powerful people were watching a slow-motion car crash. I sidestepped Connor effortlessly, my voice never wavering. The theft from the logistics company was not enough to sustain the illusion. I continued advancing the slide. When the banks finally caught on to the insolvency and froze his credit, Connor needed a more substantial influx of cash. The screens flashed to a new document. The collective intake of breath in the room was audible. It was the deed to the Cascade estate, my parents' historic home. The signatures of Desmond and Brenda were clearly visible at the bottom, authorizing a massive second mortgage. 6 months ago, I narrated, staring directly down at my parents, a second mortgage was taken out against a fully owned historic estate. The sum was $800,000. Connor convinced the homeowners that this was a bridge loan for a guaranteed waterfront project. I clicked to the next slide showing the disbursement of funds. But the waterfront project does not exist. The $800,000 was immediately diverted. $200,000 went to pacify aggressive private lenders. The rest was used to maintain the illusion of solvency you see before you tonight. Brenda let out a sharp, jagged cry, burying her face in her hands. The reality was crashing down on her, inescapable and public. Jada was staring at the screens, her mouth open in a silent scream, her perfect sequined dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume. I was not finished. I had one final blow to deliver. I advanced to the last slide. The screen split into two images. On the left was the lease agreement for a luxury penthouse condominium in Miami, Florida. On the right were bank statements showing recurring monthly transfers of $12,000. When you ask for transparency, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register, you must demand to see where every dollar is spent. The stolen funds were not just used to pay off debts or rent ballrooms. I turned slowly, facing Jada. She looked paralyzed, her eyes locked on the Miami lease agreement. They were used to fund a $12,000 a month penthouse in Miami. I stated, the words hanging heavy in the air. For a woman named Valentina. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, total, and devastating. The air itself seemed to shatter. Jada stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She looked at Connor, her face contorted in a mask of betrayal and rage. Connor backed away from the edge of the stage, his hands raised defensively, stammering incomprehensibly. I looked down at Jada, meeting her eyes with the same cold, dismissive stare she had given me over a piece of bread. The microphone amplified my final word, and the silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds before the entire ballroom shattered. It did not just get loud. It exploded. The sound was a chaotic mixture of scraping chairs, dropping glass, and furious shouting. The investors I had warned did not ask for clarification. They were apex predators of finance, and they instantly recognized the smell of a sinking ship. Men and women in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns sprinted for the exits. Cell phones were already pressed to their ears as they dialed their legal teams and public relations handlers to aggressively distance themselves from the radioactive crater I had just opened. Connor realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The charming facade melted away entirely, leaving a desperate, cornered rat. He dropped his glass of bourbon. It shattered on the polished hardwood floor, but no one cared. He turned and bolted for the service corridor behind the stage, thinking he could slip out through the kitchen and disappear into the Atlanta night. He did not make it 5 steps. Malik had anticipated the flight risk. 2 towering private security contractors, men Malik had personally vetted and hired for the evening, stepped out from the shadows of the velvet curtains. They crossed their arms, blocking the exit completely. Connor bounced off them like a bird hitting a window. He stumbled backward, panting, completely trapped. Jada snapped out of her paralysis. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage violently ripped apart. She charged at Connor. She did not care about her ruined designer dress or the hundreds of people watching the spectacle. She hit him. She slapped his chest, her hands curled into fists, screaming at the top of her lungs. She demanded to know who Valentina was. She demanded to know where her money went. Connor raised his arms, trying to shush her, trying to manage the optics. But there were no optics left to manage. He was a fraud, and she was the fool who married him. In the front row, the patriarch of the family was experiencing a different kind of destruction. Desmond fell heavily back into his gilded banquet chair. His hands gripped his chest. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He was not having a heart attack, but he was having a financial stroke. He was a man who spent his entire life building a respectable logistics company to secure his place in high society. Now he realized he had handed the keys to his legacy to a con artist. He was ruined. He was publicly humiliated. He had absolutely nothing left. Brenda did not look at her husband. She did not look at her screaming daughter. She looked at me. The scales finally fell from her eyes. She stopped seeing the rebellious, independent daughter she loved to belittle. She finally saw the powerhouse chief executive standing on the stage. She saw the crisis manager who made international scandals disappear for the right price. She scrambled up the stairs to the stage, her high heels catching on the carpet. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She grabbed my forearm, her grip desperate and tight. "Kendra, please," she begged, her voice shaking with raw panic. "You have to fix this. You handle this kind of thing for billionaires all the time. You have the media contacts. You can spin this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them the documents were fake. We can sell the logistics company. We can cover the debts privately. Just do not let them arrest him. Do not let us lose everything. Please use your magic. You have to save the family." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt absolutely nothing. I reached over with my free hand and carefully, deliberately peeled her fingers off my emerald silk sleeve. I stepped back, creating a physical and emotional chasm between us. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice as cold as the ice in her abandoned champagne glass. "I only fix crises for clients who can afford me," I told her. "And as you clearly established at dinner, I do not contribute a penny to this family." Brenda let out a broken, devastated sob. I did not stay to comfort her. I turned my back on the stage, the screaming sister, the trapped fraudster, and the broken father. I walked down the stairs with perfect posture. Malik and Sarah fell in step beside me, forming an impenetrable wedge. We walked through the chaos of the St. Regis ballroom without a single person daring to stop us. We pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool, humid Atlanta night. The air felt incredibly fresh. My chauffeured Maybach was idling at the curb. The driver opened the door. I slid into the back seat, Malik and Sarah joining me. As we pulled away, I saw the flashing blue and red lights of federal and local law enforcement vehicles swarming the hotel entrance. Sarah had made the call exactly when the first slide hit the screen. The cleanup crew had arrived. 6 months passed. I am sitting behind the massive glass desk in my penthouse office, watching the morning sun illuminate the Atlanta skyline. The air conditioning hums quietly. A fresh cup of black coffee sits on my desk, next to a finalized contract for a new Fortune 500 client. The business has doubled its revenue since the gala. People respect a firm that operates with surgical precision and zero hesitation. The fallout for my biological family was swift and absolute. Connor was indicted on 22 counts of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Because he was deemed a massive flight risk with offshore connections and a mistress in Miami, the judge denied bail. He is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting a trial he cannot afford to win. Desmond and Brenda tried to salvage the logistics company, but the damage was terminal. The banks called in every loan. They filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 60 days after the gala. The historic Cascade estate, the physical symbol of their vanity, was foreclosed upon and sold at public auction. They are currently renting a cramped 2-bedroom townhouse in a zip code they used to mock. Jada is navigating a brutal, humiliating divorce. She is buried in legal fees she cannot pay, trying to extract alimony from a man whose net worth is deep in the negative. She works as a receptionist at a mid-tier real estate office, fetching coffee for the kind of men she used to believe she was better than. I take a sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark roast. I do not feel any petty joy or vindictive triumph when I think about their circumstances. I just feel a profound, unshakable peace. For 35 years, I exhausted myself, trying to earn a seat at a table that was built on lies, insecurity, and conditional love. I thought being denied a plate was a punishment. It took burning their counterfeit empire to the ground to realize it was actually a rescue. Blood does not make a family. Respect, loyalty, and truth make a family. I look over at Malik, who is walking into my office with a new strategy briefing, and I smile. Walking away from a toxic table is incredibly painful, but it is the only way you realize you already own the entire restaurant. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to build your own peace? Share your story in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe, and remember, never let anyone tell you what you are worth. The microphone amplified my final word, and the silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds before the entire St. Regis ballroom shattered. It did not just get loud, it exploded. The sound was a chaotic mixture of scraping chairs, dropping glass, and furious shouting. The investors I had warned did not ask for clarification or wait for Connor to offer an excuse. They were apex predators of finance, and they instantly recognized the distinct scent of a sinking ship. Men and women in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns stood up in unison and sprinted for the exits. Cell phones were already pressed to their ears as they frantically dialed their legal teams, forensic accountants, and public relations handlers to aggressively distance themselves from the radioactive crater I had just opened. Nobody wanted to be photographed in the same room as a man who was about to be indicted for federal wire fraud. The stampede toward the valet stand was swift, merciless, and completely silent in its collective judgment. Half-full glasses of vintage champagne were abandoned on tables, the bubbles going flat alongside Connor's fabricated empire. Connor realized the absolute magnitude of what had just happened. The charming, arrogant facade he had worn all evening melted away entirely, leaving behind a desperate, cornered rat. He dropped his microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a sharp screech of feedback that made the remaining guests wince, but no one stopped moving toward the doors. Connor looked wildly around the room, his chest heaving under his velvet dinner jacket. He turned and bolted for the service corridor behind the stage, clearly thinking he could slip out through the kitchen, navigate the service elevators, and disappear into the Atlanta night before the authorities arrived. He did not make it 5 steps. Malik had anticipated the flight risk. My chief operating officer does not leave loose ends. 2 towering private security contractors, men Malik had personally vetted and hired for the evening, stepped out from the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains. They crossed their arms, blocking the exit completely. Connor bounced off them like a bird hitting a reinforced window. He stumbled backward, panting, looking up at the stoic, unmoving faces of the guards. He was completely trapped on the very stage he had built to celebrate his fake success. Down in the front row, the patriarch of the family was experiencing a different kind of destruction. Desmond fell heavily back into his gilded banquet chair. His hands gripped his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was not having a physical heart attack, but he was suffering a massive financial stroke. Desmond was a man who had spent his entire life building a respectable logistics company from a single delivery truck, fighting tooth and nail to secure his place in Atlanta high society. He had lectured me endlessly about black excellence and self-reliance. Now, staring at the screens above him, he realized he had handed the keys to his legacy directly to a con artist. He was ruined. He was publicly humiliated. He had absolutely nothing left, and the most devastating part was that he had willingly signed the documents that sealed his fate. Brenda stood frozen next to him, her hands covering her mouth, unable to comfort her husband because she had enthusiastically championed the very man who destroyed them. Then Jada finally snapped out of her paralysis. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage violently ripped apart in front of the very people she had spent years trying to impress. She looked up at the massive projector screen, her eyes locked on the name Valentina and the $12,000 monthly transfers. The realization that her designer wardrobe, her luxury vehicles, and her entire lifestyle were funded by stolen money from her own parents was bad enough. But the mistress in Miami was the absolute breaking point. It shattered her ego into a million jagged pieces. Jada let out a guttural, furious scream. She hiked up the skirt of her heavy sequined dress and charged up the stage stairs. She did not care about her ruined designer outfit or the hundreds of people watching the spectacle. She launched herself at Connor. She hit him, her hands curled into fists, slapping his chest and shoulders with wild, uncoordinated strikes. She screamed at the top of her lungs, demanding to know who Valentina was. She shrieked, demanding to know where her father's money went and how he could humiliate her like this. Connor raised his arms, trying to shield his face, frantically trying to shush her. Even now, completely exposed and cornered, he was still trying to manage the optics. He begged her to keep her voice down, promising he could explain everything if she would just stop screaming. But there were no optics left to manage. He was a fraud, and she was the fool who had married him. The visual of the golden child melting down on stage, physically attacking her bankrupt husband, while the financial proof of his infidelity glared on the screens behind them, was the ultimate poetic justice. I stood on the opposite side of the stage, watching the destruction unfold with absolute chilling clarity. I did not step in to help Jada. I did not call for security to pull her off him. I let them tear each other apart under the bright stage lights. This was the exact bed they had made. They had built their entire identity on looking down at me, treating me like a peasant who should be grateful for a seat at their table, and now they were rolling in the dirt of their own consequences. The room continued to empty out until only a handful of stunned onlookers and my shattered family remained. The polite, wealthy veneer of the gala had been stripped away completely, leaving only the raw, ugly reality of their choices. Malik stepped up beside me, his eyes tracking the chaos on the other side of the stage. He gave a sharp, definitive nod. The perimeter was secure, the threat was neutralized, and the execution was flawless. We stood in comfortable silence, waiting for the finals act of this tragedy to play out. I watched my mother navigate the absolute wreckage of the ballroom. She stumbled past overturned banquet chairs and abandoned champagne flutes, moving with a frantic, uncoordinated desperation I had never seen from her before. The perfectly poised society matriarch was entirely gone. Her expensive designer gown looked heavy and misshapen as she scrambled up the stage steps. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined, dark streaks of mascara cutting through the foundation on her cheeks. She was hyperventilating, her eyes darting wildly between the projected bank statements highlighting her financial doom and the daughter she had spent decades trying to diminish. She did not go to Desmond, who was still slumped in his front row chair gripping his chest. She did not go to Jada, who was currently being restrained by one of Malik's private security contractors after throwing her sequined clutch at Connor Head. Brenda came straight to me. She closed the distance and lunged forward, her manicured hands grasping my forearm with a bruising, desperate strength. Her fingers dug into the emerald silk of my sleeve like a drowning woman clutching a lifeline. "Kendra, please!" she gasped, her voice cracking into a raw, humiliating sob. "You have to fix this." She looked up at me, and for the absolute first time in my 35 years of life, she actually saw me. She did not see the rebellious teenager who refused to join her sorority. She did not see the disappointing freelancer she loved to mock at family dinners. She saw the chief executive officer. She saw the crisis manager who made international corporate disasters vanish overnight for a 7-figure retainer. She finally recognized my power, but only because she needed to use it. "You know how to do this," she begged, the words spilling out of her mouth in a panicked, breathless rush. "You handle this exact kind of thing for billionaires all the time. You have the media contacts. You know the narrative spin. You can get ahead of this. Tell the press it was a massive misunderstanding. Tell them those accounting documents on the screen were faked by a competitor or hacked by someone trying to ruin us. We can sell the logistics company quietly. We can cover his debts privately. Just do not let the federal authorities arrest him. Do not let us lose the house and everything we have built. Please, Kendra, use your magic. You have to save the family." I looked down at her hands gripping my arm. I searched myself for a reaction. I waited for a surge of anger to rise in my throat. I waited for a sudden wave of profound sadness or a lingering spark of daughterly obligation. I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional void inside my chest was vast, cold, and incredibly peaceful. She was not begging me as a mother asking a daughter for support. She was a bankrupt socialite begging a powerful executive for a free bailout. She still did not love me. She just finally recognized my utility. I reached over with my free hand. Slowly, carefully, and deliberately, I peeled her trembling fingers off my dress one by one. I stepped back, creating a physical and emotional chasm between us that no amount of shared blood would ever bridge again. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice matching the absolute zero temperature of the ruined ballroom. "I only fix crises for clients who can afford me," I told her, making sure every single syllable landed with lethal precision. "And as you clearly established at dinner, I do not contribute a penny to this family." Brenda let out a broken, devastated sound, a sharp whimper that echoed horribly in the cavernous space. Her knees seemed to buckle, but I did not reach out to catch her. She fell back against a production road case, her hands covering her face as the inescapable reality of her ruin settled heavily over her shoulders. She had chosen the illusion of wealth over her own daughter, and now the illusion was gone, leaving her with absolutely nothing. I turned my back on the stage. I did not look at Jada, who was now sobbing hysterically on the hardwood floor, mourning a life that was never real to begin with. I did not look at Connor, who was backed into a dark corner by my security team, sweating and silent, realizing his grift was over. I did not look at Desmond, who was staring blankly at the ceiling, mourning his vanished legacy. I was done looking at them. I walked down the stage stairs with perfect, unhurried posture. Malik and Sarah fell into step right beside me, forming an impenetrable silent wedge of loyalty and competence. We walked down the center aisle of the St. Regis ballroom, our footsteps echoing against the floor. No one tried to stop us. The few remaining hotel staff and security guards stepped back, parting to let us through the wreckage without a word. We pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the hotel and stepped out into the cool, humid Atlanta night. The air tasted incredibly clean. There was no scent of forced luxury, no suffocating perfume of desperate social climbers trying to buy their way into a legacy. There was just the fresh, honest air of the city I had conquered on my own terms. My chauffeured Maybach was already idling at the curb, the engine purring softly. My driver stepped out immediately and opened the rear door. I slid into the spacious leather back seat, Sarah and Malik joining me. As the heavy doors of the vehicle closed, sealing us in quiet luxury, I looked out the tinted window one last time. The flashing red and blue lights of federal and local law enforcement vehicles were already swarming the hotel entrance, casting harsh, erratic shadows against the grand facade of the building. Sarah had made the call to her contacts at the bureau the exact moment the first forensic slide hit the projector screen. The cleanup crew had arrived, and they were not there to do public relations. I leaned back against the leather seat and let out a long, slow breath. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the traffic, carrying me far away from the ruins of their counterfeit empire. 6 months have passed since the flashing red and blue lights of federal vehicles illuminated the grand entrance of the St. Regis Hotel. I am sitting behind the massive custom-cut glass desk in my penthouse office. The morning sun breaches the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the Atlanta skyline. The air conditioning hums a quiet, steady rhythm. A fresh cup of black coffee sits next to a finalized 8-figure retainer contract for a new Fortune 500 client. My business did not just survive the collateral damage of my family's implosion, it thrived. Corporate boards respect a crisis management firm that operates with surgical precision, absolute transparency, and unwavering boundaries. The legal and financial fallout for Connor was as swift as it was brutal. He is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting a trial he has absolutely no financial means to win. The Department of Justice formally indicted him on 22 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Because he was deemed a massive flight risk with offshore shell companies and a documented mistress in Miami, the judge flatly denied his bail. The charismatic developer who once commanded private dining rooms and bragged about sparing no expense is now wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit, trading his vintage champagne for lukewarm tap water. Desmond and Brenda tried desperately to salvage the logistics company, but the reputational and financial damage was terminal. The banks called in every single commercial and personal loan they had on the books. 60 days after the gala, they were forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The historic Cascade estate, the physical monument to their vanity, and my father's supposed legacy was foreclosed upon and sold at a public bank auction. They are currently renting a cramped 2-bedroom townhouse in a zip code they used to mock relentlessly at their country club dinners. Their high society friends, the people they sacrificed me to impress, dropped them the moment their net worth evaporated. My mother's phone no longer rings with invitations to charity luncheons. She is a social pariah entirely isolated by her own blinding arrogance. And then there is Jada. The golden child is currently navigating a messy, humiliating, and completely broke divorce. She is drowning in legal fees she cannot pay, desperately trying to extract alimony from a man whose net worth is buried deep in the negative millions. Without my parents' stolen wealth to prop up her lavish lifestyle, she was forced to vacate her luxury-leased house. She now lives in a tiny, outdated apartment on the outskirts of the city. I heard through the grapevine that she recently took a job as a receptionist at a mid-tier real estate office. She spends her days fetching coffee, answering phones, and organizing files for the exact kind of men she used to believe she was infinitely better than. The irony of her new reality is absolute. I take a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark roast. I look at the legal documents on my desk and the thriving empire I built with my own two hands. I do not feel any petty joy when I think about their circumstances. I do not feel a vindictive thrill or a need to gloat over their misery. I just feel a profound, unshakable peace. For 35 years, I exhausted myself trying to earn a seat at a table that was built on lies, insecurity, and conditional love. I bent over backward trying to prove my worth to people who were actively forging my name to protect a criminal. The heavy oak door to my office opens and Malik walks in handing me a new strategy briefing with that familiar sharp smile. Sarah follows close behind him, arguing playfully about a liability clause in a recent contract. I look at them, my chief operating officer, and my lead counsel, and I realize I already have everything I ever wanted. Blood does not make a family. Respect, unwavering loyalty, and truth make a family. Malik and Sarah are my chosen family. They stood by me when I was a struggling freelancer, and they stood beside me when I burned a counterfeit empire to the ground. I thought being denied a plate at that exclusive restaurant was a punishment. I thought being told I did not contribute a penny was the ultimate insult. It took watching their house of cards collapse to realize that their rejection was actually a rescue. Walking away from a toxic table is incredibly painful in the moment. It requires you to grieve the family you deserved but never received. But sometimes walking away from a toxic table is the only way you realize you already own the restaurant. The most profound lesson we can learn from this story is that blood does not automatically define a family. True family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and genuine love. For years, the protagonist exhausted herself trying to earn a seat at a table constructed on manipulation and lies. However, she ultimately realized that walking away from a toxic environment is not a sign of weakness or failure, it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You never have to endure disrespect just because it comes from relatives. Your inherent worth is not determined by their inability to recognize it. Sometimes leaving a broken table is the only way to build your own peaceful empire. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries or walk away from a toxic environment to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more empowering journeys.